Hey everyone, welcome to Interviewer Insights brought to you by Career Companion. We're with Jacob Richter again. If you haven't checked out his career journey, it's a really awesome insight to what it is to become a CTO and work up in that whole startup environment. So thanks again for joining us.
No worries.
All right, so we're gonna get a peek behind the curtain here of, I guess, what goes through your head when you're recruiting people into your team. As mentioned, we have 7 questions that we always like to ask, and I might go off track a tiny bit on a couple and throw some curveballs, but let's
Sure.
jump straight into it. One of my favorite ones is: are your interviews more casual and I would say like a conversation like we're having now, or do you have more of a technical and follow a specific methodology?
Yep. So where we're at right now with Propeller, we have a bit of both, right? So we have a four-part. Sorry, I think generally across the company. Maybe I'll just talk from within my realm. So product and engineering, we basically have a four stage interview process, as lots of companies do, right? Very common practice. First one's a just recruitment screen where generally you'll talk to either a recruiter or an internal talent person, and they'll ask you a bunch of questions, tell you about the role, tell you about the company, those bits and pieces. The next conversation with the hiring managers, a little bit more loosey goosey, right? Probably a similar conversation as we're having here now. Again, it's for that hiring manager to figure out who you are as a person. And then generally the next few rounds, technical, for instance, are much more structured, targeting particular skill sets or particular, working styles. So it is honestly a bit of a mixture of both because it needs to be to feel out the various aspects of IQ versus EQ and these types of things.
Yeah, and for your ones that are a bit more, I guess, loosey goosey, and
Yep.
we you'll always see now, and I talk to a lot of candidates where they go, "I wasn't the right culture fit." That
Yep.
was the feedback that I got. How much do you advise them to talk about what they do outside of, their job and their requirements compared to the actual job itself in these more soft interviews?
Yeah. Yeah. So like let me paint a picture, right? Let's say you have a company of 10 people. So Propeller's bigger than that now, but let's say you have a company of 10 people. If you hire somebody into that company, you don't want them just to do the job and like be plain and not fit into the company culture, right? You want to enjoy working with that individual. And that's essentially what we're looking for in those hiring manager interviews is they are looking for you. Yeah, are you a passionate person? Like not just passionate about work, who cares about that, right? Because passionate people are passionate about everything they do, not just the work aspect. So, yeah, we're super keen to know what you do outside of work. What do you enjoy? What do you not enjoy? What are your favorite foods? All of these type of things, so we can really paint this nice clear culture picture. So when you join the company, you fit in. It's not necessarily for us, as the hirers to make sure that you adhere to our culture. It's like, will you enjoy working for Propeller? Is Propeller the right place for you? That's honestly what we're trying to test during those hiring interviews.
I love that, and I love to hear that because I tell a lot of people, don't go into an interview and be so formal that you only want to talk about your job because I feel like people, I don't know, I have been trained that since we were in high school to be
Yeah,
like
yeah.
only talk about your skills and you are a great organizer and time management and
And
stakeholders.
it just seems like, I mean, yourself, obviously you've done 1,000 interviews, right? And me too, right? And it's like, it just seems, you just come across as ingenuine, for lack of a better word, right? Like you can really tell people who are not experienced interviewees, right? It's really clear. And as people develop in their careers, they get better at being on the other side of the fence and getting interviewed. They become more candid. It is very interesting. It's super important, super important.
Yeah, and like you said, it's how they you can gauge whether or not it's going to be a culture fit for either one. So just be
Yep.
genuine and be yourself because the
Yep.
last thing you want is to be someone else and then get in there and it's the culture you don't want.
Yeah, it's a culture you don't, and you can't, to be the best person you could be in a company, you need to be free, right? You don't want to feel like you're ever holding yourself back or not talking about that hobby that you find is a little bit weird because you will, be in jeopardy of getting talked about over there by some other people, right? Like you don't ever want that feeling. And particularly in the startup world, you want everybody to be the best and the most open as possible. So for us, like, be open in the interviews, right? Like that's really what we encourage.
Great. Love it. And next question. What are some of the red flags that you look out for or see in the interview process?
Red flags. I mean, yeah, it's hard here because it depends on the seniority of the person that we're hiring for, right? So there's very, very different levels of red flags across them. From the cultural side, maybe I'll just start with that. It's people who, and I said this in our previous talk, it's people who don't learn from their mistakes. Right. So if you're talking to somebody about their career history and ask them maybe like, oh, what mistakes did you make at this place? Or where do you think you could have gone better? And they tell you something, and they continue to make those mistakes, right? Like maybe the next place, it means that they're not growing as an individual or growing themselves agilely, right? Learning from the past to fix their future. That's a really big flag for us. Of course, the flags of being yourself and being open. Again, it really shows if you're not open. For somebody that interviews hundreds of people every couple of months, right? Like it's very clear when people don't do that. I think another one for me probably would be if you cannot think of, this is classic people team HR interview, if you cannot think of weaknesses or strength at throughout your career path, right? Where you yourself can reflect on, yeah, I was pretty bad at that, right? I wasn't very good at that. And I know I wasn't good at that. And I recognize that, and now I'm better at it. Like it kind of goes back to that first thing I said, but these bits and pieces. At a higher level, right? Like people that change careers or change jobs all the time is an easy red flag for us. There might be reasons behind it, but could be job hopping. Again, it just depends on the role and the seniority of the person that we're talking to. So but it all depends on what red versus yellow versus green flags we're looking on. Depends on the role, depends on the time in the company in terms of the maturity of the company, and depends on the seniority of the position that we're trying to fill. Senior leaders, for instance, we obviously have much less flex on a culture fit compared to a more junior person because they're much more shapeable, right? So it does depend a lot on the person that we're hiring for.
Yeah, great. And I love how you touched on, you want to, it's okay to have made a mistake, but don't, and that's the thing that I tell people as well, don't just say this is the mistake I made. Tell them what you learned from that mistake and how
Of
you
course,
avoided
of course, yeah.
it going
It's like a
into next
classic
thing.
classic interviews, the interview technique that I could recommend for everybody. When you describe your job at a company, it's what did you do as an individual? What was your part in the bigger picture? What mistake did you make, and what did you learn from that mistake so you won't do it, the next time? And then your next example should use that learning. Like, yeah, tell this story that you've been on as a career.
Yeah, great. And this is the one that we get asked quite a lot as recruiters, whether or not we're internal talent or recruiters. We get a lot of people who are stagnant in their role. They don't
Mhm.
have passion for it. Let's say, for example, you're an accountant and
Yep.
you go, you know what? I want to be a product manager now.
Yep.
Have you ever hired anyone from a different background, like say accounting, into a product management role who haven't necessarily had the work experience in that field? And if so, what did they do to stand out to make you take that, I guess, risk on
Risk.
hiring them into that role?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We definitely have not from an accountant. I would say
Yeah.
I haven't done that, but from other roles. It's again your drive and your passion towards it. So usually, for instance, let's just go the accountancy to product management way. Like there's no formal qualification for product manager besides maybe like a, I don't know, business manager role or training or something like that. So I would have loved to have seen from you like Udemy or Coursera or any of those type of courses, like demonstrating that as a product manager. You could probably come up with a startup idea as well, right? So what I'd be looking for is like, hey, have you ever thought about making a startup? Have you ever written a business plan and things like that? That's what I'd be gauging on. But yeah, for me, I don't really care what somebody's background is. Again, depends on the seniority. I would say if you're making the switch from a senior accountant, you're probably not going to come in as a senior product manager, so expect some re-leveling there, which is pretty normal and natural. But yeah, for me, it's just Is the person passionate about it? What skills are they going to take from accountancy into senior product management, which there's heaps, right? Like draw those parallels for me during that interview process, because I'm keen to basically diversify the school of thought in the team itself. So yeah, help me make those connections.
Perfect. And what I recommend, and I'd love to know if you would think that this is a good recommendation. There's a risk for me asking this, but I always recommend putting it in their, you know, how people put in their CV, their executive summary at the start. I
Yep.
always recommend going, look, this is why I'm wanting to transition into this role. And these are the things that I've been doing. Like I've done this course, and this course, just so it's right there at the top of the CV in your face.
Absolutely. Because particularly if you get a bigger company, people sometimes make mistakes. And if a screen doesn't read that thing, they'll look at it and be like, wrong fit, boom, gone, right? So we always read those executive summaries at that top level, whether that's an attached document over the top or some other form on a website that you filled out. So yeah, please put all that stuff in. The reason for the change, your passion for it, what have you done and demonstrated that, always helps.
Great. And the next question would be, what are the questions you like candidates to ask you? Because, you know, we always tell candidates to be asking questions throughout. So it's
Yep.
more of a flow of a conversation. But usually it will get to the end of the interview and you'll say, do you have any questions for us? What are some questions that you like to hear?
Yep. So the question, I'm going to talk about it in startup land, right?
Yes.
So the questions that I would like to hear candidates ask is the same questions that I would ask in an interview back to the company that I'm interviewing for, right? Which I would always ask more general business questions, right? To show interest beyond just your role, right? So like, where's the direction of the company? What's your capital raise? What's your finance situation? All of those things you should really care about joining a startup. So I would love questions from that direction. The ones we always get now is the hybrid remote in office work stuff. Not because we have a particular direction, but it's great. You don't want to join somewhere and have that policy way out of whack, right? That doesn't work for you. So please ask those questions up front. And then for me, it's also asking all these culture type questions, right? Like, do you have events in the office? Do you have hobby clubs in the office? What are the people like? Do you hang out with the people you work with on the weekend? All these types of things, again, tries to paint a better picture for you as a candidate of what it would be like working in there. And that's what I'm actually sad if people don't ask those questions, and it kind of highlights a little bit of a culture mismatch straight away.
Great. That leads into my next question, which we sort of touched on throughout this, and we can kind of high level it. It's, you know, how can you tell if someone's a good culture fit for your team? So obviously this is going to be personal to you.
Yep.
And the sort of question that I'll attach on the end of that is, you know, how do you think the best way for them is to project what kind of culture fit they are?
That's being open and honest, like that's and we kind of touched on that earlier,
Yes.
right? Like, don't don't pretend to be somebody you aren't in an interview, right? Be yourself, because you can't fake it the whole time, right? The worst case situation will be you will be hired as somebody you're pretending to be, and then you will live your life basically acting for the rest of your time. You don't want to be in that position. It's a horrible place to be, and probably you will slip up and make a mistake, and then if it's not the right fit for you, well, then the stuff will come out from that, right? So it's just be open and honest as much as possible during those sessions. The right questions that you care about to those interviewers at the end are very important. And yeah, like be passionate about the role, be honest about your other, job opportunities and bits and pieces like that, where you are in your personal growth and bits and pieces, and it'll all kind of work out.
Great. And for someone to be considered to work for you or at your particular, the reason I'll frame it this way, for you yourself
Mhm.
and for the company, is it important for them to have a degree? And the reason I say for you yourself and the company is I've asked somebody this question before and they said, for me personally, a degree is not important, but for the company that I work at, it is mandatory that you have a degree.
So for I'm going to answer this in a number of different ways. So for some roles, it is mandatory to have a degree, right? Accountancy, prime example. It is mandatory to have a degree in an accreditation because that is a legal requirement for us, or legal positions and things like that. For generic roles, let's say, so roles in product or across wider business administrators, bits and pieces like that, I don't care, right? I don't care. But what does a degree show, right? A degree shows that you're dedicated enough to get a degree. It also can build you skills that are impossible to learn elsewhere. So what skills are impossible to learn elsewhere? I have never seen somebody teach themselves higher order mathematics without a degree. It just does, like, there's some of these skills that can only come through tertiary education. But for me, for nearly all the roles that we hire for, I never look at the education section at the bottom of somebody's CV. Maybe if I'm interested, I'll look at it, but honestly, I more look at your cover letter, how you describe your skills at the top, and the places you've worked over those formal qualifications.
Amazing. And then the last question, which is a very controversial question, and I love this one, is do you think references are important? Do you take them where you currently are? And I would love to get your input onto that.
References are mixed, right? I think this is the thing I've probably learned. If you are, how can I say this? If you get through the end of the interview process and we're 50-50, references are very important, right? Because if a reference doesn't tell us exactly what we're looking for, you won't be hired, right? So that's in the negative case of references. So very important to choose the right reference who will speak about you openly and honestly. References for us also are risky, right? You can game the reference system. So we have to acknowledge that when we do reference checks. References will also tell us how you work as in a team, though, right? Like, you yourself might not be reflective of that, particularly if you have a reference check from your manager. We will ask them questions that you can't possibly know, right? Like, how is this person in comparison to your other team members? These types of things. What did this person ask for in their one-on-ones? How was their last performance review? You wouldn't answer openly and honestly to those types of questions. So it is a bit mixed for us. References are an important part, but I would say not always, required. If I'm being honest, at that final stage, we already know, because we've done the interview processes well enough and we've talked to you for many hours by that stage. We already know if you're a good culture fit. References are almost that last check where we're not expecting any surprises, and usually don't get any surprises.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Look, like I said, I'm mixed feelings on references because obviously I work in recruitment, internal talent.
Yep.
The last startup I worked for, they didn't use references at all because
Yep.
they were under the impression of you're most likely not going to use the current manager that you have because they don't know you're looking.
Yeah.
Then you're going to give
so out of date.
exactly, yeah. Then
Yeah.
you're going to give us ones that are from the past that aren't necessarily true.
Or heavily curated, your friends.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
But I think the thing that you touched on there that is really gold from a reference is, like you said, what is the best way to manage them? Like asking those questions that they can't be asked. So I think that is the gold part of a reference. Yeah. Perfect. Those were all the questions. Thank you so much for taking the time to do your career journey and the interviewer insights. We really appreciate it. And we'll chat to you soon.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam.